The vice appears to be tightening around Florida Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz. Today, the House Ethics Committee opened an investigation into allegations of sexual misconduct by Gaetz. Though at this point, that could be the least of his problems, frankly. Yesterday, we learned that his close associate, a guy named Joel Greenberg, is likely preparing to cooperate with authorities. Greenberg, who previously pleaded not guilty, faces 33 charges, including stalking, wire fraud, and the sex trafficking of a 17-year-old girl. He's also being investigated for recruiting young women online and paying them for sex, including, allegedly, with Congressman Gaetz. For his part, Matt Gaetz is being investigated for possibly sex trafficking the same aforementioned 17-year-old girl, according to the New York Times. And here's the thing. The probe is not just limited to that, because investigators are also looking into whether Gaetz traveled to the Bahamas with women who were paid for sex and what Gaetz may have known about any payments to young women allegedly recruited for sex online. Congressman Gaetz has denied all wrongdoing, saying he never paid for sex, that he has not had sex with an underage girl, and that he did not recruit women online, and that investigators are engaged in a fishing exercise about consenting relationships. He's also refused to resign. In fact, just an hour or so ago, Gaetz spoke at what appeared to be a conservative women's garden party in Miami, which was held nationally on the veranda at Trump's resort there while people milled around in the background. He vowed that he is not going anywhere.
The smears against me range from distortions of my personal life to wild, and I mean wild, conspiracy theories. I won't be intimidated by a lying media, and I won't be extorted by a former DOJ officials and the crooks he is working with. The truth will prevail.
Joining me now is Katie Benner, Justice Department reporter at the New York Times. She's one of the authors on a story about how Matt Gaetz's former associate, Joel Greenberg, is expected to plead guilty. That piece is full of incredible new details. Also with me, Mark Caputo, senior national political reporter for Politico, who was at that Gaetz speech in Miami tonight, who also recently wrote about Gaetz and Greenberg. Mark, let me start with you. I mean, Gaetz is not someone who shies from the camera. In fact, that seems to be why he's in politics, quite frankly. And so even facing very, very significant legal exposure, which I think any competent lawyer would advise you to shut up about, he's not going to do that. What was going on tonight?
Yeah, what was going on tonight was Gaetz being Gaetz. He's of the school that if he is quiet, he looks guilty. If he has lawyers talking for him, he looks guilty. And he's kind of an always-on offense Republican, a MAGA Republican. And just a few days ago, he accepted this long-standing invitation to come speak for obvious reasons, as he wanted to kind of plant his flag to say, look, I'm not going anywhere. I think it's almost a direct quote of what he said tonight. And he has had kind of a week of attempted counter-programming, knowing that there's going to be this kind of steady drip, drip, drip of bad information. I mean, after all, he was associated with Joel Greenberg. I mean, these guys were engaged in activity that a lot of people find very distasteful. And in the case of Joel Greenberg, he's been indicted for sex trafficking a minor and other offenses that Gaetz is not accused of. So, you know, Gaetz and Gaetz's view is that if he's quiet, he's going to look guilty. So he's going to do talking. That comes on the heels of him hiring a new legal team. Some people thought, oh, maybe he's going to shut up now. Well, he's not going to shut up.
You know, Katie, in terms of the drip, 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 I mean, from your reporting and others, this seems to be quite a significant investigation now. And, you know, anytime that there's someone who faces a bunch of charges and then appears like they're going to plea, that's usually bad news for the people that might be associated with them. But there's also like different points of this. There's Joel Greenberg, who is a sort of county tax assessor. There's a hand surgeon and marijuana entrepreneur who also appears to have had some dealings with Mr. Gaetz and also is under investigation. Like, it seems like a fairly broad scope. Is that fair to say, of the investigation at DOJ?
It's fair to say that the investigators are going to pull the camera back and go as broad as they can to find as much information as they can. What we know about investigations is the FBI can go in looking at one thing, and then over the course of their investigation, as they subpoena records, as they obtain information from people's social media accounts and their email accounts, their records, their phones, they can find other wrongdoing, and the investigation can spread to new topics. And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing investigators do here. Keep in mind, I'm saying this, but it does not mean that Mr. Greenberg is guilty of any of the things he is currently being probed for. I'm just saying that investigators are starting to look at a wider array of things. So what began with an investigation into Joel Greenberg, the Seminole County tax collector, for a variety of crimes, including sex trafficking of a 17-year-old girl, turned into a sex trafficking investigation to Mr. Gates because he was suspected of having sex with the same girl. Now, as investigators have had more interviews, one of the interviews they've had was somebody relaying to the FBI that they heard a conversation between Matt Gaetz and a very well-connected Florida lobbyist about potential election interference in a state Senate race that Democrats thought that they would flip. Basically, what the men allegedly spoke about was whether or not they could run a third-party sham candidate in order to siphon votes away from the Democratic candidate. That is not necessarily illegal unless that sham candidate is paid, which is what the lobbyist told us when we interviewed him about it. He said he does not recall the conversation, but that just talking about it would not be illegal. That said, the FBI is very interested in that conversation because, of course, again, they're broadening the lens. They're looking at everything. And if they feel that there's reason to continue to investigate election fraud, they will proceed.
Mark, can we talk about Mr. Pirozzolo, who's the hand surgeon, marijuana entrepreneur, sits on the board, I believe, of the Orlando airport? Connected to, you're laughing because it's like the most incredible Florida bio of all time. That is him there greeting.
It keeps getting weirder. Yeah, it keeps getting weirder. You know. Yeah,
that's him greeting Donald Trump with the governor Ron DeSantis when he came, and he's the one who, again, there is reporting indicating investigations into trips to the Bahamas and the possibility of payment for sex on those trips, and Matt Gaetz going along, but. You know, this seems like a pretty connected guy more broadly in Florida Republican circles if he's showing up at the airport when the president comes to town.
Sure. He, in fact, Matt Gaetz at one point was saying maybe he'd make a good Surgeon General for Florida. The doctor loved coming to Tallahassee. There's a kind of a ceremonial thing that they have during session, which is kind of doctor of the day. Normally, you know, you're a lawmaker, you have a doctor to your district, they come up for a day. He's done it like 27 times, 24 times. So he's been very kind of active in coming to Tallahassee, very interested in the medical marijuana legislation that Gaetz, when he was a state legislator, had helped pass. He's just kind of one of the cast of characters who was on that Bahamas trip you mentioned. Probably about 3 planes that we're talking total. There was him, his girlfriend, these other women, which some people were escorts, including the once 17-year-old at the heart of the sex with a minor case, who then had turned 18. There was also a now former state division of business and professional regulation chief who also flew his private plane there. And then there was Matt Gaetz, who flew commercial. So they all kind of gathered there in the Bahamas for quite a time. The question is whether that time was illegal or not. There are going to be interesting aspects of the case in that it is illegal to pay someone to have sex and go across state lines. The question is, since some of these women had long-standing relationships with these men, were they actually being paid directly for sex, or was it a secret arrangement sort of deal?
Yes, right. And Matt Gaetz somewhat famously said early in this that there was an effort to paint his generosity towards ex-girlfriends as something more untoward. And Katie, let me ask you one final question about the Department of Justice in this. Obviously, this is a politically sensitive case. We know it was greenlit under Bill Barr, the last administration. Where is this being run out of? And I imagine if you're the Attorney General or anyone else, right, you want to make sure this is all very by the book and very segmented from any possible politics or political interference. Absolutely.
So to your point, Attorney General Barr, he did have to greenlight this last year. He sent a memo to all federal prosecutors saying if you're looking into any members of Congress, people running for office, up to the presidential race, he needed to basically sign off. All supervisors would need to be apprised, and then the Deputy Attorney General and the Attorney General. So that was the process. The investigation itself is being run out of the Middle District of Florida. It is actually not Gaetz's district. That would be the Northern District, but it's where the Greenberg investigation began. So it's still being run by that office.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.